Pode ser o Grupo Corpo.
It might be a dance festival, the Pantanal Dance Company, the Museum of Modern Art of São Paulo, or Art in Colors, the Minas Gerais Philharmonic, or Vale Music Program, wherever there's...
Pode ser o Grupo Corpo ou a Companhia de Dança do Pantanal, Museu de Arte Moderna de São Paulo ou Arte em Cores, Filarmônica de Minas Gerais ou Programa Vale Música. Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. Dos projetos que todo mundo já conhece até aqueles projetos que todo mundo precisa conhecer. É valorizando essa cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos.
Com o apoio do Instituto Cultural Vale, a arte popular é destaque no Maranhão.
E o nosso papel é fazer com que elas sejam conhecidas, valorizadas.
Vale, transformar a mineração hoje é transformar o amanhã de todos.
Ministério do Turismo e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 20ª Flip Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. O projeto conta com benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura. Vale Mais Cultura. Tem patrocínio oficial do Instituto Cultural Vale. Patrocínio Itaú. Copatrocínio O Globo. Apoio Esquilo, Mac Móveis, Prefeitura de Paraty, Globo Livros, Unigel, CQSFV Advogados e Oceana. Concepção Associação Casa Azul. E realização Secretaria Especial da Cultura, Ministério do Turismo, Pátria Amada Brasil, Governo Federal.
A Flip para mim é muito mais do que uma festa literária. E eu acho que para muitos paratienses ela também é muito mais do que apenas 4 dias no ano. Na verdade, ela é um projeto de uma tentativa constante de trazer as pessoas para a literatura e para a arte. E isso aconteceu na minha vida mais ou menos quando eu tinha uns 14 ou 15 anos, costumo dizer que eu sou cria da Flipzona, que é a ala jovem e adolescente da Flip. Então, lá por meados de 2009, a Flipzona passou a existir no calendário da Flip. E eu sou cria realmente desse projeto, que era um projeto de produção cultural, que envolvia literatura, audiovisual, produção de eventos, enfim. Então, basicamente, dos 15 aos 21, 22 anos, eu estive dentro desse momento da Flipzona e, enfim, eu acho que grande parte do que eu sou hoje em dia vem muito por conta da quantidade de conhecimento que eu consegui obter dentro dessa formação da Flipzona. Então, isso passou para todas as esferas da minha vida e hoje em dia eu trabalho com direito, sou advogado, mas eu consigo ver arte dentro da minha profissão, ver literatura dentro da minha profissão, é uma parte muito importante do direito. E basicamente a Flipzona conseguiu mudar o que eu entendia de arte até então. Então eu tenho muito orgulho de dizer que eu sou cria da Flipzona. Então eu sempre tive dentro do meio da Flip e sempre fiz muita questão de estar nesse meio, porque eu entendo que a Flip, enquanto agente transformador, ela conseguiu mudar a minha realidade e me trazer para mais perto, então, desse mundo artístico, desse mundo literário. E eu entendo que a minha função hoje em dia, basicamente a minha função como ser humano social mesmo, é continuar na festa literária de alguma forma, seja na Flipzona ou em outras áreas, para trazer a própria cidade para dentro da Flip e para que cada paratiense consiga entender como a Flip traz uma noção de território, que é isso que ficou forte para mim. É uma sensação de pertencimento. Eu sinto que eu tenho pertencimento da obra literária, não só do autor homenageado, mas de muitos autores que por aqui passam, mas que eu tenho pertencimento também do meu território, que eu consigo fazer com que essa literatura ela converse com o meu próprio território, que ela converse comigo e converse com tudo na vida. Então, basicamente, eu acho que é isso que a Flip fez na minha vida e na vida de muitos amigos meus. Foi trazer a literatura para a realidade que não é só a do livro. Ela trouxe realmente a literatura de uma forma ampla e capaz de estar na nossa vida em todos os dias.
Flip 20 anos. Vidas que transformam lugares, que transformam pessoas. Escreva conosco essa história. Faça parte da rede amiga da Flip para continuarmos transformando juntos os próximos 20 anos. Acesse flip.org.br e faça sua doação.
Hello everybody, I'm Alice Neto de Sousa. I'm a poet, and the poem that I'm going to read by Maria Firmina dos Reis is a poem in dialogue with another poem that I have. The quality of gaze. I'm going to read Those Eyes by Maria Firmina dos Reis. I saw some eyes. Oh, what beautiful eyes. Those eyes have a certain twinkle that forced me into deep meditation, that awakened in me a vague yearning. Those eyes touched my soul with a living flame of heated passion. Those eyes bring me joy and unearth a sense of affliction. I should have seen those eyes long ago. At birth, those eyes speak to me of love. In those eyes I want to return. In those eyes I drink of life. In those eyes with a sweet languor, in those eyes that effortlessly make sweet vows of eternal love. Those eyes that in a wink say in a moment, in a sweet turn, everything that the lips tell us and that the lips cannot say. Those eyes have a magic wand. Those eyes arouse me to live. For them only I love life. For those eyes only I want to die. Good afternoon. It's a huge pleasure to be here. We're moved, we've heard poetry, and with this flip, we're celebrating 20 years, and it's a privilege to be here. We have a special roundtable for everybody participating in Flip. It's a roundtable on 20 years of Flip with two writers, Pauline Melville, Bernardo Carvalho, and chaired by Noemi, Jaffe, the writer. So enjoy the roundtable. Good morning or good afternoon. It's a huge pleasure to be here again with you all, and especially with these two authors, Bernardo Carvalho and Pauline Melville, who've been here in Flip before, Bernardo in 2005 and Pauline in 2010. So Bernardo, it's been 17 years now that he was here for the first time at Flip, and Pauline 12 years ago. Great. Bernardo Carvalho is a journalist by training. He was a correspondent for Folha de São Paulo in Paris, in New York, and he's been publishing novels, more than 12, according to my figures, almost every year, and his first novel was 11. No, I don't have the date, sorry, okay. Which won several different awards like APCA twice, Jabuti, Portugal Telecom. His last novel is The Last Enjoyment of the World, which takes place during the pandemic. And Pauline Melville was born in British Guiana. She's both Amerindian and European by origin, and she currently lives in London. Her training as an actress, including short stories, novels, essays. She won the fiction prize from The Guardian, the Guyana Award for Literature, the Whitbread Award, and other awards. And on her friend Salman Rushdie says, I believe that she is one of the few writers that are generally original writers to emerge in recent years. Some of her works are The Master of Chaos, Eating Air, and The Migration of Ghosts. Before I ask my first question, Pauline asked to say a few special words. So I'll turn the floor over to Pauline.
Boa tarde a todos. Como vai?
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you?
Desculpe, não fala português.
I apologize for not speaking Portuguese.
When I was in England before I came here, a Brazilian friend, I said, I can't speak Portuguese. And she said, you only need to say 2 words of Portuguese. Lula presidente. I seem to have got along quite well with those words so far. But first of all, there is somebody that I'd like to pay tribute to, because we are here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Flip, and there is somebody who I think is here with us in the audience today. Her name is Liz Calder. Thank you. She founded Flip. It's been an amazing success. Every international writer in the world fights to come here, where we meet other writers, we have discussions, we have arguments. And I just want to say something about Liz, which is that if there was some Greek goddess who has not yet been discovered and who everything she touches blossoms, it is Liz Calder. She founded this festival, which is an enormous success, and she founded a publishing company. She discovers new writers. Everything is creative, and everything she touches blossoms. And I'd just like to say thank you very much, Liz. There's something else, just before we really get going with whatever landscape we're going to travel. There's something that I would like to say. I would like to pay tribute to Salman Rushdie. I was last here at Flip when he was also here. I think he had brought out a book called Luca and the Fire of Life, one of his novels. What has happened to him is absolutely horrendous. And I think we should all remember that writers, when they speak the truth often to power, to religion or politics in particular, can put themselves in great danger from hatred and bigotry and all the things that literature tries to work against. And I would just like to wish him well, and I know that I will carry the wishes of all the festival goers here, that he continues to write and shows his courage and resilience, and that he supports other imprisoned writers. I'd like to remember them as well. There are many of them all over the world. So a round of applause, please, for all those other writers. Okay, Tabon.
Thank you very much, Liz. No, rather, thank you very much, Pauline, for those remarks. You notice that I'm not very nervous, right? Okay. There's a word here that I love, which is the word recognition. And many traditional stories, fairy tales, parables happen at the time of recognition, which there's a word in Greek as well, in Greek literary theory, which is anagnosis. When someone or a community recognizes that the hero is truly a hero. It is a moment of epiphany and enlightenment where recognition exercises a role of transformation and redemption. For example, in the Odyssey by Homer, when Ulysses finally returns to Ithaca after 20 years, he is recognized by his maiden, a dog. Hence, to recognize is more than just knowing again. And it takes on the sense of the present tense and giving a new meaning to the past. And the past tense with a new meaning to the present. I'd like to ask you how, so many years gone by since the first visit by you to Flip, how you recognize yourselves. How do you recognize Parachi and the paths of literature since then? How could you say that some kind of epiphany happens or enlightenment with this recognition?
Could I say there is some sort of enlightenment with the recognition of... Well, of course. Yes, I mean... the festival expresses some kind of interaction between writers of many different sorts and genres. We come together, and it's quite rare, you know, for writers to mix with each other. and discuss their own ideas, because we sit on our own at home, working, isolated. And so this opportunity to reach an audience and to speak about literature and about the passion that we all feel for it is extraordinary.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Liz. And when Noemi talked about recognition, I thought to myself, I'm going to fall into another trap, because whenever I come to flip, every time I stick my foot in my mouth or have a fight or an argument with somebody, it's always a disaster. So I didn't want to recognize this. I would like it to be different this time. And when Noemi began to talk about recognition, I'm going to fall into this trap again, being contradictory. It's beautiful, that thing of Ulysses and his return to Ithaca and the recognition, but I don't know if I'm going to provoke you, but in fact it's extremely important for me. I think that we are experiencing a moment where recognition has become almost commonplace. And I tend to think that literature, the most interesting literature, is that of not seeing oneself in it or recognizing oneself in it, a literature of uncanniness, which I think that we're losing, and a literature which is more difficult of recognition is more easier, because you see yourself in that mirror and you begin to like things, and not in the sense of rediscovery, but in the sense of peace. But after these 20 years, I think that what for me is extremely present is the loss of this possibility of us dealing with literature as non-recognition. So basically that's it. But I don't know, really. I don't want to get into an argument again. Bernardo had promised me that now he's peace and love Bernardo, but he forgoes this and has done so very rather hastily. Okay, great. But I would like to insist a bit on recognition and ask how you two see yourselves or recognize yourselves so long afterwards, if you perceive in your own attitudes or in the way that you now conceive literature or think of it with regard to how you thought of it before. If you seeing yourselves here today, have some kind of transformation in yourselves as writers or as cultural agents.
I don't see myself as a cultural agent. I see myself as a storyteller. One of the things I have learned, and I think it's true of a lot of writers, is that we don't always know what we're writing. Everybody assumes that we know and we have planned and organized and that everything we write is intentional. But sometimes you can finish a book and it is saying something that you hadn't recognized, which is often interesting and surprising. And sometimes I don't read a lot of academics who write about my work. But every now and then one of them will point out, did you mean this? And I thought, well, I never thought of that, but it's possible. So you find other possibilities. So I recognize that I don't always recognize myself.
I agree totally with Pauline, and I'm going to pick up on the point by the attack on Salman Rushdie, because there's something interesting beyond the obviousness of the horror and the brutality and everything else. There's a relationship which I think tells a lot about literature and this issue of non-recognition and everything. It's that there are two ways of using the word and appropriating the word, both in, I don't know if it's male or female. The fact of Khomeini says that the fatwa and the word literature, fatwa and literature. So in fatwa, it authorizes the and authorizes and prevents that you do not respect the word. So that is so crazy because it's a word that can not become obsolete, and even so there's going to be a lone wolf who's going to fulfill that fatwa when that word was in principle already been forgotten. But it's a word of authority. It authorizes, and this authority is unquestionable. And the word literature, which is attempting to fight and trying to kill, is the place of doubt and contradiction and ambiguity. And it's a word that deauthorizes the person who's speaking. So in this sense, I think that this is extremely important because this combines with the thing that we're losing. It's a word that rather than authorizing, it does not authorize those who are emitting that word. And that's the political side of the word. So when Pauline said that sometimes she writes things that she doesn't know what she's saying or that she doesn't recognize, this is a word of literature. It's a word that is not directly connected. It's not assertive in that sense. It's a word which creates ambiguities and contradiction, and the political strength of literature is precisely in this word, which is a separation between the emitter and what was emitted. And that's the grandeur of literature, and that's what I think that we can lose and end up in a word which is a word of authority, which authorizes the one who speaks.
Very much that today it's becoming a little dangerous because people are not being allowed to say things. And this is happening more and more often, that in England it's called no platforming. You don't like what somebody says, so you don't allow them to speak. And literature is really not about that. It's about nuance and discovery and imagination, and that you can imagine anything you want. But I noticed that in Europe there's the war in Ukraine, and all of a sudden Russia is the aggressor, and in Italy they said, I think maybe we should drop Dostoevsky from the syllabus of literature. The same thing happened in England. We won't play the Tchaikovsky because it's Russian. But my favorite one was, apparently Russian cats are being banned from international cat competitions. But you can see the sort of censorship and the danger of not being allowed to speak. And I think Salman Rushdie particularly has always promoted freedom of speech, that people should be allowed to say whatever they want, but it can be dangerous, as he has discovered.
So, Bernardo, but again, I'd like to extend this question to Pauline. Could I conclude, Bernardo, based on your caveat, the word that I used, recognition, when you said that perhaps literature is somewhat saturated with recognition. What's missing, it needs less recognition. And now when you talked about the fatwa, and that we writers perhaps are becoming deauthorized to speak, to express our doubts, our ambiguities and contradictions, would you say that in all this time that transpired since the first time that you were here at Flip, literature is undergoing a process of sameness, recognition, and dampening contradiction? I would like to clarify that I was praising deauthorization. It was not that I was not saying that my word is being deauthorized. I think it's good for my word to be deauthorized, and what I think is good about literature, it's a word that deauthorizes itself, puts the place of the person who speaks in doubt and ambiguity, in a place of risk. In this place, Khomeini could never occupy that place. His word has to be absolute authority, is an absolute emitter of the word that has to be put into practice by his followers. So I think that the risk there is this, to think that every word authorizes and that you reduce literature to a word of authority, when what's interesting about literature is precisely the opposite. It's to show that the subject is vulnerable, the subject is ambiguous and contradictory. The person who speaks can be speaking against himself or herself and not in favor of. The other thing that you said, what was it again? It was about the definition of literature today, I think. I don't know. And perhaps there was something, I thought that someone's going to ask me that, considering what I thought that literature is. And I was thinking to myself on the road and memorizing what I was going to say, and I had saved this jewel that I prepared for today. But yesterday I thought to myself, and went to the house where the people from the Compañía das Letras, and they recorded an interview, and I let this out already, so I'm going to sound very conceited. Somebody's going to hear what I had to say today. So it sounds rather conceited, but I actually believe that. I think that literature has something else, which is sensational. It's that literature is not in the place where we are today. It's literature exists in silence. So while we're saying what we think that literature is here and defining it and everything is based on what we already know of literature, there's somebody writing. It could be one single book anywhere in the world which is going to contradict everything that we're repeating here today about what literature is. So I think that this is the strength of literature. That's the place. And I, for example, could expound on literature, saying that literature is this, that, or the other. It's very beautiful, but at the end of the day, it's going to always be somewhat outdated, because literature escapes. It's fleeting. It's not in the place where of this definition, in this common place of recognition. Okay, it's in a place that it's a place, unknown to us as well, who produce literature. And I think that this is the most interesting thing about literature. That's why you can't follow rallying cries or rules. From now on, literature is going to be this, that, or the other, X, Y, Z. It's interesting. It's not going to be. If it were, it would be very uninteresting. That's it.
Completely. I couldn't define literature, except that, sometimes it's not where you expect it to be. You hear it on the bus, you hear it in a shop, and writers are always listening, because the literature is around everywhere, and you just have to fish for it and pick it up and find it. And also, that there is something else. There are other writers who are not published for various reasons, sometimes because there's a lack of diversity in publishing. There are unheard writers, but hopefully that they will emerge and keep creating.
Bernardo, you wrote some of the most vehement texts and apocalyptic texts on the catastrophic reality that we've experienced in the last 4 years in Brazil, at least in Folha de São Paulo, in your columns that you wrote in the... I am an ardent reader of your work, considering that you were in Flip at the beginning of the first Lula administration. Do you think that this repetition of the Lula government beginning now, again, you're here again, can it mean a chance for some re-beginning, or a new beginning, or are we condemned? Great. I don't know if we're condemned, but I think there's a difference, a strange difference. Perhaps the importance of the first Lula government and the inauguration, I didn't realize how important it was. And perhaps because we came from something basically a social democracy, at least for someone from my own class and everything, and I was basically protected, and I had never experienced poverty or police brutality or anything myself personally. It appeared to me that we were in a progressive cycle, that things were doing well, but I have friends who were really super enthusiastic. They went to the inauguration. I didn't feel like going to his inauguration back then with the narrower room for maneuver and a more realistic view of things, considering today that it's great that things change and everything, but it's very difficult for everything to go right. It's against all odds. Even it's with enthusiasm, even so that I didn't have in the first government. I know what I experienced in the last 4 years. I don't want to go through this again, ever again in my life. So I believe that what happened now, and for me, doesn't matter if it's not exactly what we would like it to be in the new Lula government, if it doesn't all go perfectly right, if it's more Republican and it's not something so with the meets all the social demands, or more or less. I don't really care that much, because we're coming out of a hole, an unthinkable hole, an abyss that is truly terrible. And considering my columns in the newspaper in Folha de São Paulo, I realized it was 4 years, a little bit more, because I had already been, I feel sometimes it might sound presumptuous, but like Cassandra, because before Bolsonaro, I used to say, he's going to win, he's going to win. And everybody said, no, you don't know what's going on. You're involved in literature. Your thing is like frills. It's not the hardcore of reality that you deal with. You don't understand politics. It's not going to happen. And my columns had already shouted out that Bolsonaro was going to win. And I realized in hindsight that I hadn't left that place in my columns. I repeat the same thing again, 6, 7 years. I never stop saying the same thing. I'm sort of ashamed. Am I writing exactly the same column, the same quotes? And sometimes I am writing the same thing, so I have to go there and cut things out, because I'd written this 4 years ago. It was not that I went back to it. It's a kind of intensity of repetition. It's like a commonplace to not leave that place. I think that it was the worst nightmare I've ever experienced. I've never experienced anything like it. And I think it's weird. I understand that there are ideological differences and political differences, but I think it's strange and weird for someone in Brazil to not have felt the hell of these 4 years, no matter how you may support Bolsonaro or whatever. I think that this is terrible. It's a kind of collective hallucination. And we hallucinated together, and some people are still in this inertia of hallucination. So that basically that was it. And to a certain extent for us writers, it was also liberating Lula's election, because now we're free to think of and write. We don't have to talk about the same hell all the time.
Can I just add one thing, which is that Brazil is giving the world a little bit of hope. It might be difficult, but the rest of the world is terrible.
I think it's extremely important to understand that the threat is not over, and it's not going to end. I think that's what I was saying. We left a hole, a horrible hole. If Bolsonaro were re-elected, I don't know what was going to happen. It would be tragic. But I think that we're not at a time of joy, or rejoicing. We're in a moment of relief in the presence of this hovering threat. It's important. We have to keep this in mind. I think there's a tendency. People tend to call me a pessimist, and to see pessimism as a kind of paralysis. And as you gave up the fight, you throw in the towel, you're no longer able to fight, because you know that at the end everything is going to go all wrong. It's the opposite. During the Bolsonaro years, I realized that there was a need, almost childish need, to survive through optimism. I think this is suicidal, because it's a kind of wish to magic realism, to believe in something as if it were magic thinking, as if you could change reality simply by your own will. And I think it's also dangerous, because the Bolsonaro movement is based on a narcissistic relationship, childish relationship to the world where the others don't exist. It's always your image projected on the world, your own image projected on the world. And I think that this combines with this tendency towards magical thinking, over-optimistic. I think pessimism has an interesting role. It's a tragic role of understanding, not self-satisfaction with epic heroes and so forth. So the issue of recognition you were talking about, it's beautiful, but I think that there is yesterday basically I was fighting and arguing about this. Overcoming doesn't mean overcoming. The story of overcoming sounds beautiful, but it doesn't actually mean, the tale of overcoming does not mean overcoming. It can be a huge mistake, an illusion, the tale of overcoming. So it's pleasant to recognize, to be able to read something that works at the end. But I think that what the idea of tragedy and this, which is a powerful idea and very difficult to withstand, but it's a way that human beings were able to make human beings see themselves. It's that we are a suicidal species. We're on the verge of the abyss and the brink of self-destruction, and even so, with this awareness, we are not able to stop this. We're unable to stop and take a turnaround. We have to do a little fix it here, fix it there, but no, we're at the H hour, at the final hour, and the tragedy gives you this idea, because the hero is not the person who wins at the end. The hero is, he discovers that no matter how hard he tries, he's going to do something against himself. He tries so hard, he thinks he's doing properly. He's screwing his mother and killing his father. So in tragedy, it's extremely important. And there's a recent tendency, a political tendency as well, to say that tragedy is paralysis, and it's skirting a reality which would be more powerful and more political, more epic and more heroic. So I think that it's as important. It's great what you're saying, because in tragedy as well, there's a time of recognition, which is another kind of recognition, like Oedipus, when he recognized that he was the one. Oedipus was, it's very difficult, Oedipus's situation. So Pauline, now that England is also undergoing a complicated moment, politically speaking, do you think that you could repeat some of the things that Bernardo said concerning Brazil? Do you think that at the time in England it would also be more intelligent to be pessimistic than optimistic?
Is it more intelligent to be optimistic? Unfortunately, the very right-wing government in England has based itself on what you were describing, a magical optimism. But it was very compelling, and a lot of people fell for it. But I would remind you that it's not always just magical realism, that actually that is better translated, if you want to be on the right side of things, as the marvels of reality, which is slightly different from magic fantasy. And it's finding the magic in what is real. And that is what should be really magical realism. And I think that's what Gabriel Garcia Marquez said. He said he never made anything up. Everything he had seen or heard. He's written a book. In English, the translation is Fragrance of the Guava, and it's a series of essays on what he thinks about magical realism. And for literature, I think it's important not to think that magical realism is fantasy, but to understand that it has its roots in the real, but that blossoms into something extraordinary. And for politics, well, what can I say about England, and even Europe too? It's in a very dangerous position. And I like the idea of a pessimistic hero. I think that's wiser in the current circumstances in Europe.
Pauline, I only read one of your books, which is The Master of Chaos, and which is a book of stories. You defined yourself as a storyteller. I like that because that was the feeling that I had when I read your book. You have the capacity to tell stories which is so different from others and with such great precision that I asked myself yesterday, I was asking you as well, if you had lived in Russia, because one of the stories there talks so intimately about inside a group of Russian writers who participate in a call for proposals for an award. I thought that you had lived in Russia, so you also write about science and about other topics. And I asked myself, well, how does she know so much? Where does she get all that? And so I would like for you to tell us a little bit about how you know so much about so many things in so many different places.
Well, actually, I don't know so much at all. I was beginning to feel confined because there is a tendency these days to make writers only write about where they come from and their own experience. And I find that very limiting. And I wanted to try and break out, so I wasn't just a writer from Guyana or the Caribbean, that I wanted to be able to write about anything, because I felt a sort of pressure not to write about what you're not. It's a matter of identity politics. People keep saying, you can't write about black people if you're white, you can't write about women if you're a man, but Kafka wrote about an insect. And nobody said, oh, you're appropriating the rights of insects. We really should be able to write about anything. So I decided to write a collection of stories which was really varied. And this is a confession, I wrote some stories, just a few, set in countries that I have never visited, which is not very popular at the moment. But that's what I decided to do. If I want to write in the persona of a Japanese fisherman, I will. I don't care that I haven't been there and I don't know what Japanese fishermen are doing. If I want to imagine it, I'll imagine it. But the Russian story that you were talking about had a particular provenance. I'd read that the European Union had decided that the Russians were too extreme, that the European Union wanted to give grants to groups of writers who would write a bit more moderately. And I thought this was hilarious, but I also thought it was very arrogant. So I wrote a story about a group of Russian writers. I have visited Russia, but I haven't lived there for long. And I just decided to write that story, but it had a message that I wanted to give about how you shouldn't tell writers what to write. And the European Union had got a very bureaucratic, I think it's true and it's still happening, that they're giving grants to Russian writers to write carefully. And of course Russian writers don't. They probably invaded, Ukraine because of what the European Union was trying to get them to do. I don't know, but that was the background of that story.
We have a question here from the audience. Igor Ribeiro for Bernardo. Bernardo talks about the threat of the word against the established powers. On this stage, Camila Sousa Villada, Luciane Aparecida led a dangerous festival, and Giovanni Martins said that for him, a book is a weapon. Books are a weapon. Who can strike out against fascism more? Culture, money, or footballs? I don't know. Sorry. It was bullets, not footballs. She corrected herself. Couldn't read the handwriting there. It was bullets, not footballs. I thought, I'm so stupid. I thought because it was difficult to understand It must have had something to do with the FIFA World Cup or whatever. That's what I understood. Richarlison is on our stage now. He's the... Okay, so I thought that literature cannot do much against bullets, so I think that it would be a kind of magical thinking and an optimistic thing to say that if Bolsonaro took over Brazil by the gun and with religion, I also think, which is, although Caetano Veloso said that we need to defend religion and everything, I, as gay, I cannot understand how you can defend a religion which says that part of the population doesn't have the right to exist. So I think it's very serious. I'm saying this, although it sounds beautiful and everything, but the oppressed classes who attend the evangelical churches, it doesn't matter. If there's part of the population that I'm part of that cannot exist, these churches cannot be defended, okay? That's a red line. But with regard to literature, I think that literature is more powerful when it is weaker, more vulnerable. It's most powerful the more it lets itself go out on a limb that it allows, and the subject who speaks for literature allows, but his face on the line. There's a paradox between doing literature of empowerment. I think that it is literature of empowerment. In the first moment, it's very powerful because it is very, for recognition, it has a power. But I think that in the long term, it is a kind of, it backfires in a way, because literature has a potential which is very weird, which is this power and potential to go out on a limb with the name on the line, to let itself have the courage to submit to something that it destroys it. And I think that the strength of literature lies there. You won't be able to stop cannons with books. So I think the bullets with bullets or with the law, right? I think that you cannot, I think there are a lot of things that sound cool with the issue of this idea of literature as empowerment and everything, as, for example, take people out of a position of vulnerability where there's no dialogue with anybody, and suddenly you recognize themselves there, and this allows you to understand taking a quantum leap. So I think this is incredible. So, and this is happening a lot today, and it's very praiseworthy. However, I think that in the long term, what's the most interesting thing, politically speaking, about literature is when it praises vulnerability and not strength. That's beautiful, Bernardo. Okay, Pauline, here is another question from the audience. You said that literature has to do with observing and fishing. Interesting metaphor for Parachi here on the seaside. What art of fishing is this all about?
I just meant that you have to often look underwater. And not see things directly in front of you, that you have to fish for something and it's an idea and you don't always know what it is and it's vague and you can't always see it clearly, but you hope to hook onto something. It's just a simple metaphor, that's all, that writers are looking for what will make their story work, that's all.
The question, another question for, that was the same question for you, Bernardo, here. From literature as fishing. Like the football thing. I don't know. I don't know what the metaphor of literature is fishing, but I think that I don't know. Okay, that's all right. In your book, Bernardo, The Last Enjoyment of the World, último gozo do mundo. You talk at a certain stage about cynical realism. I loved that expression, and I think that in some sense it has to do with what you were talking about just now concerning this tragic pessimism. Could you expound on that a little bit? I don't know. Over the years, I thought a lot about the issue of denialism and flat earth and all that, and it's kind of absurd. It's so absurd that it is inconceivable, and it's unthinkable for these people to be that stupid to believe in things, in these denials. And so I began to think that there is actually perhaps unconsciously, I may be wrong, but I was trying to think in the novel and the characters, unconsciously denialism is based on a total understanding, an absolute understanding of the moment that we're living in. But the moment of chaos that we're addressing, the repair of it is so superhuman that denialism, it's like a child understands that that's impossible, or that the effort that would be necessary for you to take that turn would be impossible. So the child prefers to say, and in the book it's somewhat this, I'm going to come for the last time. It's the last enjoyment of the world. I'm going to spend all my money. I'm going to kill everybody. I'm going to invade other lands. I'm going to do everything that's prohibited. I'm going to destroy law. I'm going to praise things good instead of evil, or evil instead of good. And it's like a mechanism, almost unconscious mechanism of observation of the size of the problem. As if, because it's impossible for a person to say the earth is flat. Nobody in the world really believes that the earth is flat. But I think that it has to do with a denial of what the person is seeing. It's not that they didn't see it. They saw it, but it's just too much. You can't stand. It's too big for me. So I think that they're in the denialism itself, or in the denialists, there's a tragic figure in them as well, which is not a total imbecile, but it's a person who has no structure, emotional structure, psychological, physical structure to resist or withstand a situation. We don't have at the end of the day either, because although we're not denialists, nobody here stops taking airplanes or driving. Nobody's anti-capitalist to forego all their own assets, but there's an issue, whether we like it or not. You can be, okay, let's fix things. There are laws in capitalism that you need to enforce. I'm not a communist or anything myself, but obviously it's not going to work. It's obvious that, I don't know, because human beings were put on Earth as a cancer, and the fate of humans is to self-destroy. Maybe it is, but the problem is that the way things are, there's no fixing. There's no fix. It's a radical fix. For you to fix it is a huge return, a collective turnaround in a superhuman effort. So I think that denialism and this cynical realism have a little bit to do with this business of, okay, fine, don't care. I throw in the towel. I'm going to take my private plane and I'm going to go around the world in 80 days or practice radical extreme sports and spend all my money and blow the wad. So this is a strange place. I thought it was a place of stupidity, but it's not the place of stupidity. It's that of blindness, interested blindness of this cynical realism. So, I don't know. There's a scene in your book which I think is amazing, which there's a child. If a father's disappeared and the child is young, the first word that the child says is not mother, mama or papa, it's Dick or Pauline. Your book, the one that I read, it hasn't been translated into Portuguese. Rather, the word that the child said was scumbag. I'm going to read an excerpt precisely in this story that takes place in Russia, where the character says, those kids, those Marxist kids, they lost something. Race, religion, and nationalism. These are the things for which people are willing to die. That was back translated into English. For I'd like you to comment on this excerpt. Those Marxist kids, what did they lose? What did they no longer or cease to understand? Race, religion, and nationalism.
I don't remember writing that.
Those Marxist boys missed race, religion, and nationalism. Those are the things people are willing to die for.
I think it's probably true, even if I just don't remember where in the story it came, that's all. But I don't always, as I said, remember what I've written. But I think there is a loss of something. I think, and my Cuban publisher is very despondent about what is happening there. And there seems to be nowhere in the world that I can look to see a really, really big, popular, progressive movement. So there is a sort of cynical realism that's taking over the world, I think. But things do change, and things... history is not linear. It's not just progressive going forward. It goes backwards and forwards. It twists and it turns. So we never quite know what's going to happen. But at the moment, I think this is a time for cynical realism, because I think nobody really with climate change is really, the governments nowhere are grasping what needs to be done. And so the populations just, as you say, they give up, and they can do what the character in your book says. Just give up, go mad, drive fast cars, gamble, deny it, ignore it. And I think all of us feel that to some extent. None of us know what to do, because the governments aren't doing anything. We've just had, was it COP, the one in Egypt, the conference. I mean, what are writers going to do to combat that? It's difficult. Keep trying.
Bernardo, there's another episode in your book which moved me greatly, especially because I like dogs myself. And it's an episode, and it's amazing because the character is driving and she sees a dog, and they see each other, and she sees the dog as if the dogs were saving her with the dog's gaze. I would like for you to comment on this exchange between the woman driving and the dog. And I love animals, and dogs especially. I didn't understand how a dog can save us, but I would like for you to explain a little bit about that. So, it might sound silly, but when I wrote this scene, I wept. It is based on a real situation during the pandemic. My mother, and I was living with my mother in Rio, and I went back and forth. I stopped traveling by plane, and I drove back and forth between Sao Paulo and Rio. And one time, on one of the trips, this happened. In Ayrton Senna, I was reaching Sao Paulo, the highways, people were driving fast, and I was on the high-speed lane, and there was a dog, which I thought, which is a bitch, a dog, a female, and running between and trying to avoid the cars. And we looked at each other, myself and the dog. There was a time where there was a terror in the dog's eyes that it was about to get run over, and my own terror with that situation as well. And it was a moment. It was like an epiphany, and the epiphany as the dog saved me from not running over her. because if I had run over her, my life would have stopped there. It would have been a disaster for me at that point. So it's as if she were looking at me and said, okay, you're not going to run over me, she said. And I looked back, and she had escaped the traffic. And it's impossible to happen because it was one car after another at 70 miles an hour. And she had managed to cross the highway, I realized, through the rearview mirror. And that was how it happened, as if there had been a kind of communication, a connect between the two of us. I couldn't save her. There was no way, because I was driving 70 miles an hour myself, and she saved me because she escaped. So it was incredible. Okay, people have told me that we're running out of time. Unfortunately, Bernardo has books to sign. Unfortunately, we don't have any of Pauline's books for her to sign at the bookshop. And I want to thank both of you and turn the floor over to both of you for your final words.
Thank you for the honor of allowing me to come here to Parachi. I hope I can come again. It goes on for many, many years. Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you.